Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our Mind-Body Connection series, today I'm going to look at some important action steps you can take to make the emotions, doubt, and power columns work best for you. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and put your comments and questions below. So what is an action step? Of course, we all know that it's something you do to take an action. But one thing I want to highlight when it comes to my action steps is that these aren't just activities that you do in your physical body. They're also altered ways of thinking. That is a major action step when it comes to mind-body work. In fact, more than, I would say, probably 2/3 of my action steps are ways of thinking about things. So I've grappled with whether to change the wording of it, but I like to keep it as action steps because I like to encourage you that changed thinking is an action. Now, I have all sorts of action steps. I have an action steps PDF, which I've talked about. These PDFs are available for a small fee. But the action steps PDF by itself is a little hard to use by itself because it's about 140 different ways of thinking or actions that you can take that often are helpful with mind-body issues. All won't apply to you. So you're going to want to find the ones that do. Whether you're looking at my action steps PDF or you're talking to me or you're seeing something in a video and I talk about an action step, not everything is going to apply to you. You want to find the ones that apply to you. Ultimately, this is about engaging with your mind, how your mind works, and figuring out what are the action steps that can change your mind in ways that feel fitting to you. You can't fake this. If I give you an action step and I say, oh, think this way, and it just doesn't work, well, then we need to discuss it more. Discuss it with friends, discuss it with me, discuss it with yourself, but you need to come to terms with how you're going to think about it. Once you're settled in it, these action steps can really work. And some of them aren't going to fit for you, or maybe you won't even agree with them, and you can always feel free to challenge what I say. In fact, challenging these things and bringing doubts up is a big part of the work. All the questions are welcome. Here's the thing about my action steps. I used to have it organized in 4 columns, my mind-body maps. We know emotions, doubt, and power, and I had action steps as a 4th column. But I've since changed it because what I've come to see is that actually action steps are what are applied to each of the other 3 columns. You're going to have emotion action steps, you're going to have doubt action steps, and you're going to have power action steps. Sometimes they'll have some overlap. But the reason I organize it this way now is that each column has a different goal. The emotions column is about articulating the most key emotions that you have that can lead to symptoms. We want to articulate a honed, it's really a honed list of broad ideas, but specific in their themes. As an example, a broad theme is abuse, but a specific theme is something along these lines. I'm pulling this out of thin air, but something like, I was abused at the moments I trusted most. See how specific that gets? Ultimately, we want a list, usually of about 6 to 10 themes, but sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, that really describe the full range of your broad emotional experience. When we have that, let me tell you why that's useful. We've talked about how, in other videos anyway, the emotions column is most useful when it comes to the onset of the symptom or an uptick in an existing symptom. So when you look at the timing of a symptom, the timing of an onset or the timing of an uptick, or even the timing of a downturn in the symptoms, you can start to track what's going on emotionally. You might find one of your emotional themes got activated, and that's what led to the onset. So let's talk about the kind of action steps that you can bring into play. Remember, these are actions you could take, with your body and doing something about it, but they're also ways to think about things. So one of the action steps is really what I just said. You want to pair an emotional trigger with a physical symptom, and that timing is exact to the millisecond. And I've often been kind of amused by how people are like, well, how could the timing be exact? How do you know that? Here's the reason I know that. I mean, we know it for other reasons. There are scientific studies and findings that suggest this, but it's also pure logic. if the mind is upset about something, why would it wait a couple of minutes or a couple of hours? It wouldn't. There's no reason for it to. And it's not that rational. It just goes ahead and does it. So the timing is always going to be exact. We can certainly talk more about that. Put your comments below if you have questions about that. I can answer them and explain more. Ultimately, though, you want to find which of those emotional themes was active when that timing hit and the symptom began. If you can do this and you get the very specific emotional idea right, this is the kind of thing where the symptom can drain away right then. Now again, this is just for the emotions column. If you have a doubt problem, which relates more to chronic issues, you're not likely to have that symptom drain away from getting the right emotional trigger. So a lot of times people will say, well, I've been looking for my emotional triggers all this time and it hasn't reduced it. That may be that it's not an emotions column issue. But if it is an emotions column issue and you hit on the right idea, the anxiety may come down or the physical pain may vanish. I've had this happen thousands of times, not only with myself, but with other people that I work with. I thought what I would do today, though, is to give examples of these action steps. So I'm going to give two, maybe 3 or 4 in each column. So I gave you one emotion action step. Find a way to pair that emotional trigger with a physical symptom. When you do that, by the way, that helps with doubt, because if you see it very clearly, you won't be able to deny it. I'll talk more about that in another video. That bears its own video. Another action step. We need to help you recognize how you're not empathizing with yourself. So the goal in the emotions column is to get these emotional themes articulated so that you can start to empathize with yourself. There were ways in which I was not empathizing with myself. I thought that I was. I thought, oh, I like me. I'm going to be good to me. But when I really looked at it, I hadn't actually even articulated the emotional themes enough to even begin to empathize with it. I wasn't giving myself proper credit for what I had suffered. I'm not looking to feel like a victim or feel sorry for myself. It's more about recognizing the authentic emotional experience and then empathizing. And it actually takes some time to learn to do that. That in and of itself, another whole video. So I'll make note of these and I'll come back to these. Another action step, and you'll notice these are all action steps of thinking or feeling. I haven't said one that was just purely physical, though there are those too, and I'll get into that soon. Another action step in relation to the emotions column is to apply your core narrative to make sense of your emotional life. Now, this definitely bears its own video, which is, what is the core narrative? So the core narrative is something that is an accurate but positive view of yourself that takes into account the big emotional themes. Essentially, I want to encourage you that none of us understand ourselves very well. It takes time to process what happened to us. And this is because we grew up in childhood. State the obvious any better than that. But the idea is we were young kids. We didn't know how to process these things. As adults, we have to go back and do that. It's not necessarily in therapy. In fact, this core narrative work that I do often gets people very far in areas that they were working hard in therapy to get to. I recently was working with someone, and we articulated something. I heard something in what she was saying, and I phrased it in a new way that was designed to be broad but specific and really hit the core of who she was. And in this case, what it was about is she had always felt that she was ahead of the curve, but she didn't feel comfortable about that. She felt she would be judged for it, or she felt she was being arrogant. She didn't want to accept that that was true. But when I voiced that, I could even see her body relax. And that's when you know you hit on the core narrative, when it feels right. So I can help you develop that, but if you develop that core narrative, you'll have a much better sense of your emotional life and be able to adjust your thinking in ways that allows you to see those pairings of emotion and physicality. You're not going to be able to see them unless you have the themes. Moving on to doubt. The goal of the doubt column is to articulate all your questions and confusion, all your fears and doubt. no matter how big or how small. Anything that leaves you with questions or confusion or fear or doubt is going to be fuel for symptoms. Now remember, the doubt column is usually for chronic symptoms, the symptoms that just won't move. And it's because of your belief system, understandably so, that makes it hard to move. I'm going to remind you about the 3 levels that exist in the doubt column. Okay? That is doubt as to whether you have a mind-body issue or not. In other words, you might be thinking, well, is this structural? Do I have something medically wrong with me? Usually people who come to see me have already seen medical doctors like crazy. They've seen tons of them. And here's the thing. People sometimes say, how can you say what you're saying? Don't you trust the doctors? I actually do trust the doctors. What I'm saying is I trust them to rule out the serious issues to then allow me to do the mind-body work because they've ruled it out and I trust them. You know, you hear stories sometimes of people going to doctor after doctor and they can't find anything and then later they do. That's extremely rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen and you should always go to a doctor, but once you've done that, we can start to work on doubts. The emotions column, you want to get those themes set and then they never move. That's you. In the doubt column, the questions aren't set. In fact, they're meant to be eradicated. The doubt column is meant to be reduced to nothing eventually, but you'll get new doubts as you go. And so you always want to recognize the questions that you have, and there are things to be done to reduce doubt. So here's an example of an action step. Now remember, my action steps PDF has 140 of these. I'm just listing a couple so you can get a sense of them and a sense of what is an action step. Here's an action step of thinking related to doubt. Recognizing unanswered or unarticulated questions. This is incredibly important. We think we know our own minds, but we basically almost never do. We have to investigate more. Even after all this time, I'm still discovering new doubts, new questions. And part of the reason I'm good at answering these questions is that I let myself have that doubt and those questions, and then I find an answer that works for me. Here's another action step that relates to doubt. You need to find the angles that work for you. As an example, some people I work with really need to lean on the scientific studies. They want to know, well, what are the findings? And I'm all for that. And thankfully, the scientific studies all back mind-body work up. But amazingly, there's plenty of people whose minds work totally differently, and they say, I don't want to hear the theory, the studies. I believe you. Just explain it to me. And you're allowed to need what you need. So there's all kinds of different ways to get better. You want to find the angle that works for you. For some, it's scientific studies. For some, it is looking at the theories that exist and tearing those apart until there's nothing left. And then, as one patient I work with says, by process of elimination, it's a mind-body issue. Yes, that can happen often. That often involves rejecting theories that have randomness in them. So logic is another key point. That's a piece of logic where I say, well, wait a minute. Do we want to believe in this theory that has randomness in it? A theory that has randomness in it really isn't a good one. I use scientific examples of this all the time, but let's take gravity, for example. In theory, gravity is a theory, but it happens every time. You drop something, every time it falls. Now, I understand if you're on the moon, gravity's less, but it all goes along the physics of the universe. There's never an exception. We look at our minds and bodies as if they're these great mysteries, and in some ways they are. But they're not such mysteries that random theories are going to apply to us. So we may not know everything, but the question is not, do you make sense, but how? Some people rely on the logic like that. That's been big for me. I kind of needed all of it. Evolutionary theory is another action step where you can apply and think, well, is the body really made to be this weak all of a sudden? Or some people get some relief by me saying, hey, remember, healing just happens. It's totally natural. When I was helping my brother with his back pain, that was the thing that got him hooked into this, to actually think about it. So you have to find the argument and the angle that works for you. Here's another action step in relation to doubt. You got to get all your questions answered to your satisfaction, one way or another. And a lot of it's through those different angles. But it could be through me, or it could be through a particular book. I have books that answer different aspects of things. Some people need to know, well, what's the physiology behind this? And then I refer them to Candace Pert's Molecules of Emotion. That's my favorite physiology book about this. Or maybe Mind Over Medicine by Lissa Rankin. These are two great books that talk about the physiology. There's many ways to get this done, but we need to know your mind to do it. One last action step to mention in terms of doubt. We need to disarm triggers by resuming normal activity. Now notice, this is the first physical action step I've mentioned. But it's also a mental action step. It's both. You don't just resume normal activity, but you also check in with your mind. You notice, where's my doubt? Where's my worry? When I got back on the court to play basketball, I knew that the challenge wasn't physical. The challenge was mental. I had to go through that game and say to myself at virtually every stop along the way, you're okay. You can't get hurt by this. This is a mind-body process. Remember. And you build and build and build. So doubt is something you build on over time to bring down to zero. That's, again, its own video, but this is very heartening to me because there's lots of things I can talk to you about. Now let's move to the power column, and let's talk about the goal there. The goal of the power column is very different than the emotions column and very different than the doubt column. The goal is to find a good and settled relationship with yourself. Sounds easy, right? Okay, I know it's not, but it's a lot easier than people make it if you break it down in a particular way. A lot of people go to therapy for years and years and years in search of this. The reason I love the power column, and it's so useful, is that it helped me to develop a very quick method to get to the heart of the matter and push away everything else, because there's so much that happens in your life, and that can get very confusing. So one of the things I can be helpful with is to help people develop their core narrative so that they can know what really matters to them, what's really central to who they are and how they relate to their mind and their body. And there are three aspects of power. One is your relationship with yourself. That's a complicated thing, of course, and it has many different parts. But ultimately, if I can boil it down to one thing, you want to have a relationship with yourself where you can be empathic to yourself, where you like yourself, where you understand yourself, and here's the most important part, where you're at peace with yourself. That's not as hard as it's going to seem. We're going to get into some of the action steps that'll show you how to do it. Another part of power, though, is not just with the self, it's with others. You're going to notice in your interactions with others that sometimes you're feeling very powerful, and sometimes you're not, and you probably haven't even thought of it that way. Let's also remember sometimes people like to change the term away from power to strength or confidence or competence or just being at peace. Whatever the case may be, if you're feeling powerful, that's equivalent to you're feeling good. When you're hanging out at a party and you're just feeling good and at ease, you're feeling powerful. If you walk into a party and you feel like, I don't know who to talk to and I don't feel good and I just want to get out of here, that's not powerful right there. And I'm not criticizing that. I'm just wanting people to recognize when they are in power or out of power. And that's actually an action step of power, is to recognize, well, am I feeling powerful or not? And it can be in relation to a certain other person. Celebrities are a great example. We never feel powerful in relation to celebrities. We think they're the ones who have the power. I'm the one who wants to talk to them. They don't want to talk to me. Well, one thing I've found that's most helpful if you are talking to celebrities, treat them like a normal human being because they are one. And then you're just as powerful as they are. I'm not saying this is always easy, but there is a quick fix to it if you can understand what's happening in relation to power and shift it. I just was texting with somebody that I work with today. She described this wonderful shift in her power dynamic with her cousin, who she often feels is rejecting of her. And she realized, you know what? I don't have to give so much to this person because this person doesn't give back to me or doesn't appreciate it. I'm going to start to interact with her in a way that works for me. And she said, I'm just going to visit for maybe 20 minutes, see their kid, and get out. I'm not going to subject myself to that lack of power. The third aspect of power is your relationship with your symptoms. The vast majority of people watching this are in a spot where the symptoms feel in control of them, not them in control of their symptoms. I absolutely understand that, but we can work on that with action steps relating to power. So, the first action step, and the most important action step of the power column, is to develop the core narrative. I said it before a little bit, but I want to review it and actually spell it out a bit more. So here's the thing. We all have inaccurate, negative views of ourselves. They're based in supposed fact, but they're actually self-attacks. That's not a core narrative. A core narrative is one where you are aligned with you. You're your own buddy. You believe that what you've been through mattered, wasn't easy, and that you did a pretty good job with it. And then you start to understand how you can carry it forward. So the core narrative is accurate. We're not just going to say, oh, I'm great because I want to feel great. You'll never believe that. It has to be something you're going to believe. So it has to be accurate. It has to be positive about you. And it has to hit on all of the most important themes. Remember the emotions column? The important themes from the emotional column? It has to be hit on with full understanding. Just so you can understand this, one of my themes is about the fact that my father died when I was young. I do talk about this a lot, but it's a good illustrative thing. I experienced that in some ways as he didn't want to know me. Of course, that's absurd from a rational standpoint. But from a kid's standpoint, what do we know? He just wasn't there, and why didn't he want to be there? So you can have all kinds of misunderstandings, but that goes into my core narrative, which is, oh my God, somebody didn't want me. But see, that's the negative narrative. If I turn it into a positive, I can recognize, no, it is accurate that I felt that he didn't want to be there. But as a positive feeling, I can say about myself, well, really, he missed out. And I'm sure he even knew it at the time, because it would have been a very hard position to know he was dying. So I can turn that into something good. And we're actually going to get into that with the action steps. So let's get to more specific action steps about power. One action step that you can do is you can utilize the power column to help you with the doubt column. And you can challenge physical triggers and doubts by having a powerful stance. So this is easier said than done, but there are times where I will find people are challenging the triggers and they're really just saying it. They're saying the words, this can't hurt me, but they don't actually believe it. If you don't believe it, that's not a powerful stance. So go get that belief. Go figure out what you need to believe it, and then you can feel powerful. And you can feel like, you know what? If Dr. Ratner can do it, so can I. I can be just as powerful as him. That's what I invite people to do, and ultimately that's a major part of the goal. Another action step in relation to power. This is a phrase that I found for myself, and I lend it to people all the time because it's a very helpful one. You need to be fiercely in your own corner about your experience. Whether you label it trauma or just your past, whatever you label it, you've got to be in your own corner. We are so full of doubts about whether our experience is right. And here's the thing. It doesn't even matter entirely if we're right about everything. We know, our bodies know what we were right about. And if your body is hurting, it's telling you you were right about your pain. So listen to it. That's an action step right there. Listen to your body about what it is telling you and be fiercely in your own corner about it. That core narrative is important because you need to know how to be fiercely in your own corner and about what. This brings me to another action step of power, and that is to accept your experience more fully. You can't get peace within yourself if you haven't accepted fully what did happen to you. And I can't tell you how many pain sufferers want to deny what happened to them, not because they aren't strong enough to face it. Quite the opposite. It's because they don't want to be a victim. They don't want to be a sufferer. They want to have a stiff upper lip. They want to show that they're tough. They want to show they did a good job. They want to show they're adaptive. And some of the best qualities you can have get co-opted against yourself. The power column is about using those strengths to actually give yourself some space to accept your trauma, your experience, whatever happened to you, and understand it more fully. But you can't understand it if you can't accept it. There are ways in which I was not accepting things until my body forced me to do so. So let's review just a little bit what action steps are. So I want you to remember, they are mainly about how you think in the best way for you and your symptoms. They're not necessarily about going and doing something. A thought process is a doing, especially in a mind-body way, because you change your thinking, you change your physiology. There's not a whole lot more active than that. And you have to do it in the way that's best for you and your symptoms. You have to understand you. As a result, we have to understand your specific mind. So I can give ideas about action steps, but we need to understand, well, what's going on in your mind about the mind-body process that needs addressing? What doubts are there? What emotions haven't been unearthed? Are you feeling powerful or not? Do you even feel like it's allowed to be powerful? This only works if you believe it. So we have to work with the roadblocks that are in you on that. I can guarantee you this works for everybody, but it only works for you if you work the problem around who you are and how your mind works. So I look forward to connecting with so many of you on these ideas, and we will keep at it. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments and questions below, and I will get back to you personally. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you joining me.